Marcus Doyle was not a killer, Troy Kessler was, yet for 16 long years, it was Marcus who sat behind bars, paying the price for a crime he didn't commit while the real murderer walked free, hidden in plain sight. On a cold November morning in 1997, the quiet stillness of Hollow Creek was shattered by a gruesome discovery. A seasoned hunter, trekking through the damp underbrush in search of deer, caught a glimpse of something unusual near the base of an old oak tree. What looked like a bundle of rags beneath a scattering of leaves turned out to be the lifeless body of 17-year-old Lindsey Vaughn. Her face was bruised, her clothing torn, and her limbs twisted unnaturally. Nearby, a blood-smeared rock lay half buried in the soil, as though it had been hurriedly dropped during a moment of panic. The hunter, shaken and pale, raced back to the main road to alert the authorities. Within hours, the woods were sealed off with yellow tape, and state investigators were combing through the brush for evidence. Lindsey's disappearance had only been reported the night before. Her parents had assumed she was out with friends and would return home late, as she sometimes did on weekends. But when midnight passed with no phone call or sign of her, concern gave way to fear. Now, as the coroner zipped her body into a black bag and loaded it into the back of a van, that fear turned into devastation. News traveled fast in Hollow Creek. It was a small, close-knit town where neighbors still brought each other pies and kids played in the streets until dusk. A murder like this was unheard of. Whispers turned into rumors, and suspicion settled over the community like an early frost. The sheriff's department, under pressure to act quickly, focused their attention on Marcus Doyle, a 22-year-old handyman with a scruffy beard, a quiet demeanor, and a minor criminal record. He had once done yard work for the Vaughn family and was known to be somewhat of a loner. A local woman came forward claiming she had seen Marcus's pickup truck parked near the woods the night Lindsey vanished. Though her memory was vague and the sighting unconfirmed, it was enough to ignite interest. Within 24 hours, deputies were knocking on Marcus's trailer door, and within 48, he was in handcuffs. A search of Marcus's small trailer turned up what authorities described as incriminating items. A single muddy boot was found in his closet, along with a folding pocket knife bearing what appeared to be dried blood on the blade. Officers said the boot matched the one found at the crime scene, and preliminary testing suggested the blood on the knife might belong to Lindsey. Marcus denied any involvement. He said he had spent the evening watching television alone, and had no idea how the blood got on the knife. But with no one to back up his story, his words carried little weight. In the eyes of the town, and increasingly in the eyes of the law, he was a man with motive and opportunity. As the investigation deepened, it began to look more and more like an open and shut case. The community, desperate for answers, found a suspect in Marcus Doyle, whether he was guilty or not. The trial of Marcus Doyle began just 6 months after Lindsey Vaughn's murder. The courthouse was packed every day, with townspeople eager to witness what many believed would be the final chapter in a horrifying story. The prosecution arrived prepared with a carefully crafted narrative. They portrayed Marcus as an unstable loner with a history of petty crimes, someone who harbored resentment toward the Vaughns and had lashed out in a moment of rage. The prosecution emphasized the supposed evidence found in Marcus's trailer, the muddy boot, the pocket knife with dried blood, and a witness who placed his truck near the crime scene. Although none of the evidence directly linked Marcus to Lindsey's death, the pieces were presented in a way that left little room for doubt. Jurors heard that Marcus had no alibi, that the knife carried blood consistent with the victim, and that his boot resembled the one found near the body. A neighbor even testified that she had overheard Marcus arguing with Lindsey several weeks before the murder, a detail the defense said was unfounded and unverifiable. But the damage had been done. Marcus's defense team struggled to fight the tide of public opinion and circumstantial evidence. They pointed out the flaws in the forensic testing, arguing that the blood on the knife had never been conclusively proven to be Lindsey's. They highlighted that the boot print at the scene was a size too large for Marcus, and that no fingerprints, DNA, or physical evidence actually placed him in the woods where Lindsey had been found. Still, their voices were drowned out by the weight of fear and anger from the community. The jury seemed tense during the proceedings. Their faces gave away little emotion, but their eyes followed every move the prosecutors made. When the forensic technician testified that the blood on the knife could not be ruled out as Lindsey's, it felt like a nail in the coffin. The prosecution never disclosed that a more recent test had failed to match the sample definitively. That report was quietly left out of the presentation, and no one on the defense team knew to ask for it. After just 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict. Marcus Doyle was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the courtroom, his mother cried uncontrollably while Marcus stared ahead in stunned silence. He had maintained his innocence from the very beginning, but now his voice was silenced by a system that had already made up its mind. The Vaughn family embraced each other, their grief now wrapped in the illusion of justice. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief. Newspapers called the case a triumph of swift investigative work, but beneath the headlines and behind the courtroom doors, questions remained, questions about the integrity of the evidence, the speed of the arrest, and the possibility that the wrongman had just been sentenced for a murder he didn't commit. 15 years passed, and Marcus Doyle remained behind bars. Time moved on in Hollow Creek. New families moved in, old ones moved out, and the murder of Lindsey Vaughn became a dark but distant memory. For most, the case was closed. But hundreds of miles away, at a university law clinic, a young student named Brielle Carson was assigned to review past convictions as part of a wrongful conviction project. One thick, yellowed file landed on her desk, labeled simply, Doyle, Marcus homicide. Brielle began reading through the documents. Something immediately felt off. The evidence that led to Marcus's conviction seemed thin. The blood on the knife was labeled as a possible match, but never conclusively tied to the victim. No fingerprints, no hair, no fibers, just a muddy boot and a folding knife. She dug deeper and discovered a crime lab report tucked in the back of the file, dated just 2 days before the trial. The report clearly stated that the DNA from the knife did not conclusively match Lindsey Vaughn. That detail was never mentioned in court. Her curiosity turned into determination. Brielle pulled every police record, every witness statement, every forensic file she could get access to. What she found next changed everything. In the earliest reports, a man named Troy Kessler was listed as one of the first people questioned. He had a history of violence, had served time for assault, and was known to have harassed several women in the area, including Lindsey, who worked at a local diner where he was a regular. But after the first week of the investigation, Kessler's name disappeared from all documentation. There were no follow-ups, no interviews, nothing. Digging further, Brielle found a handwritten note in a detective's notebook, barely legible. It read, "Kessler worth second look." The words were scratched out in heavy black ink. She compared dates and found that Kessler had left Hollow Creek just days after Marcus's arrest. That sudden departure hadn't raised any alarms. Brielle submitted a formal request for police audio and interview transcripts from the case. Some were missing, others were incomplete. It became clear to her that Kessler was never seriously investigated. Despite his violent past and proximity to the victim, he was let go without explanation. The more she uncovered, the more convinced she became that Marcus Doyle had been an easy target, someone the town could point to in order to feel safe again. She sent anonymous tips to local law enforcement in hopes of restarting the investigation. She reached out to Innocence organizations and flagged the case for DNA retesting using modern technology. Her persistence caught the attention of a seasoned criminal justice advocate who agreed to take a closer look. Together, they petitioned the court for access to physical evidence that had been stored away for over a decade. The box that arrived at the lab held the final key: Lindsey's clothing, fingernail scrapings, and crime scene samples, never tested using updated forensic techniques. What Brielle had started as a school project was now on the edge of cracking open a long-buried truth. The evidence was fragile, aged by time and mishandling, but it was still usable. With approval from the court, a team of independent forensic scientists began a full re-examination of the physical items related to Lindsey Vaughn's murder. The key focus was the DNA collected from beneath her fingernails, material that had never been tested with the advanced techniques available today. Within weeks, the results came back. The genetic profile found under her nails did not match Marcus Doyle. Instead, it pointed to someone entirely different. The profile was run through the National DNA Database, and it came back with a hit: Troy Kessler. The revelation sent shockwaves through the legal team working on Marcus's case. Kessler had left town almost immediately after Marcus was arrested and had since changed his name. He had lived under the radar for years, bouncing between states and taking short-term jobs, all while keeping his past hidden. Further investigation revealed that Kessler had been arrested several times in other counties for domestic violence, but never faced serious charges. Now, with the DNA match, everything pointed back to him, not just circumstantial evidence, but biological proof. Alongside the DNA breakthrough, new forensic technology was used to revisit the boot print found at the crime scene. A digital scan compared the print to the actual size and wear patterns of Marcus's boots, stored all those years in the evidence locker. The test confirmed conclusively that the boot print did not belong to Marcus Doyle. Instead, it matched the shoe size and sole pattern used in a specific model of work boots that Kessler was known to wear. It was another devastating blow to the original case against Marcus. The most alarming discovery came from within the crime lab itself. A former technician, recently retired, stepped forward after learning about the renewed investigation. He revealed that during the original trial, law enforcement had discouraged the lab from exploring other leads. They were pressured to focus only on Marcus Doyle. He admitted that the lab had received inconclusive results from the knife blood sample before the trial, but were told not to file any clarifying reports unless asked directly. No one had asked. With the weight of new evidence, a motion was filed for immediate release and exoneration. The state prosecutor, who had once stood in court proclaiming Marcus's guilt, was now silent, declining to comment. Public interest reignited, and news outlets descended on the courthouse once again, this time not for a conviction, but for the undoing of one. The judge reviewed the evidence, and within hours of the hearing, Marcus Doyle's conviction was vacated. As for Kessler, he was tracked down in a small town in Arkansas, living under an alias. He was arrested without incident. When confronted with the DNA match and the reopened case, he offered no resistance. In a recorded confession, he admitted that he had followed Lindsey into the woods after confronting her at her workplace, lost his temper, and struck her. It was a brutal and senseless act. He had walked away from the scene thinking he'd gotten away with it. For 15 years, he had. Marcus Doyle walked out of prison with a duffel bag of state-issued belongings and a letter confirming his exoneration, but nothing could return the years he had lost. 16 years of his life had been taken from him, carved away by a system that had failed him at every level. He had entered prison in his early 20s, full of confusion and fear, and emerged in his late 30s, hardened by silence, isolation, and grief. His mother, who had fought for his innocence until her final breath, had passed away 2 years earlier. She never saw her son walk free. That loss, more than anything, haunted Marcus as he stepped back into a world that had forgotten him. The town of Hollow Creek offered no apology. There was no formal statement of regret from law enforcement or the prosecutors who had once insisted on his guilt. To many residents, the new revelations were unsettling, but old beliefs were hard to let go. Some still whispered that Marcus must have had something to do with the crime. Others were simply too embarrassed to face the truth. The community had demanded closure, and in their rush for justice, they had turned a blind eye to the cracks in the case. Marcus relocated to Arizona under a new name, hoping to escape the shadow of his wrongful conviction. He found work as a mechanic, a trade he had picked up while in prison. He lived a quiet life, rarely speaking about his past. The world outside had changed drastically while he was behind bars. Smartphones, digital everything, a different rhythm to daily life. Adapting was difficult. He carried the weight of time not just in his mind, but in his body, worn from years of concrete floors and sleepless nights. Meanwhile, Brielle Carson, the law student who had brought his case back to life, graduated, and became a defense attorney specializing in wrongful convictions. She joined an organization dedicated to uncovering buried truths in the justice system and helped free several other innocent people. The Hollow Creek case became a key part of her lectures and seminars, an example of how confirmation bias, poor forensics, and public pressure could conspire to destroy a life. Her work earned national recognition, but she always credited Marcus's case as the one that truly changed her. Troy Kessler, the real killer, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His confession left little room for doubt, and the evidence was overwhelming. Yet even with him behind bars, the damage had been done. The system had failed not just Marcus, but Lindsey Vaughn as well. For years, her killer had remained free while an innocent man suffered. The case of Marcus Doyle stood as a stark reminder of the fallibility of the justice system. It revealed how easily a life could be taken, not by a criminal, but by the very institutions meant to protect it. For Marcus, freedom came with no celebration, only a quiet determination to survive, rebuild, and find meaning in a life that had been stolen and returned, piece by broken piece.